I guess that many of you were, I'm sure many of you were here last week for Doug's first presentation, so I'm sure you know many things about him. Doug and I have known each other for, we've said 30 years, but I think it's longer than that. Yeah, early 90s. Doug was my pastor at Wheaton, Illinois Presbyterian Church. He's also served in Ann Arbor and Fort Lauderdale and an international congregation in Zurich, Switzerland, and The Hague in Holland, the real Holland. He's the author of 8 books and a frequent contributor to the Reform Journal and Englewood Review of Books. He's married to Susan, has 2 daughters, and how many grandchildren do you have? 4? 4. 4 beautiful, intelligent, talented grandchildren. The best. Okay, so other than mine. So without further ado, I introduce to you Doug Brouwer.
Thank you, Pat. I'm sorry that, am I on? I'm sorry in a way that Cindy Prow can't be here today, but Pat is such a good choice for today because she is Exhibit A for what I'm going to talk about toward the end of today's presentation, the transformative possibilities of travel. Now, I'm not going to tell your whole story, but the story's in the book that I wrote. Pat went along on a trip to Greece and Turkey, I forget how long ago it was, 25 years, 94. And I mean, I was oblivious to what was going on in her life at the time, but being there was a transforming time in her life. And because of what happened to her, I have this idea that travel can be, it isn't always this way, but travel can be transforming in our lives. Oh, is that enough of a teaser? Stay with me to the end here, because I'm going to make some of you mad for the first 3/4 of this presentation. And then I'll come around at the end. This is not how I was trained to preach, but I will come around at the end to offer good news. So let's get started. Oh, and then next week is a full-blown 12-part how to make travel a transforming experience in your life. My ideas about how to do that. All right, let's get started. Look, if we had small group conversations here, we could think of all the nightmares that we've had as a result of traveling. And if you've traveled, then you've had a nightmare of some kind. I know it's true. And in fact, I was just telling a story about my last trip to Portugal to walk the Camino. I was pulled out of line at passport control, and the passport control agent said, "Follow me," and we went to a little room. I was there for 2 hours. A couple of different guys came in to ask questions. They took my passport away to study it, I guess, and that was a nightmare. And I still don't know. I tried to piece all the questions together, and I still don't know why I was pulled out of line. Maybe it was a random, like TSA. Maybe I was randomly selected for further exam. Number 3, has anyone arrived at a foreign airport bleary-eyed? I sometimes get someplace that I've always wanted to go, and I think, why did I do this? But it's so unpleasant. And I've learned, of course, that you should plan a recovery day when you get in, but it's not always possible. Sometimes the tour bus is waiting, and you've got to keep going. And the advice is always to stay up that first day, and go to bed at the normal time. I don't know how to avoid that. But I want to dig deeper than those travel nightmares that just about all of us have. And the questions I want to ask today have to do with, does travel really do for us what we often claim it does? So, for example, do you think you're a better person today because of all the traveling you've done? Of course you do. I wouldn't expect you to say anything else, but I'm going to challenge you today. I'm going to challenge that assumption that you are a better person today as a result of your travel. Is it a compliment to say about somebody else, well, she's well-traveled? We mean it as a compliment, but is it? And then finally, with all the travel nightmares, does travel still give us a rich experience that we can think about and ponder in the years to come? So I would like to introduce you to Professor Agnes Callard, who's a professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago. Professor Callard did her undergraduate work at the University of Chicago. She got her PhD at Berkeley, and then she was a generational talent. They brought her back immediately to Chicago, gave her a tenure track position, and she's been there ever since. She is a remarkable scholar. She is also a contrarian. So I have relatives like this who are very annoying, and she can be annoying too. But if you take a position, the contrarian will always say, "No, I don't, I don't think so." And that's what Professor Callard has done with the subject of travel. So we think travel is a life-changing experience. Professor Callard says, I don't think so. And then she wrote a terrific essay for the New Yorker. It's now a little over 2 years old. It's available without the paywall. I don't know how to say that. You can read it free of charge. And I recommend this to you, although after I go through it today, you may you may dislike her so much that you don't want to read the original. Just as background information, I was doing the research for my book when I came across this essay, and I emailed her immediately and asked if I could interview her, because I wanted to challenge some of the statements that you're going to see. And if you are a professor at a university in the United States, your email is on the internet. So I took advantage of that fact, emailed her, and she did not respond. In follow up to that, when the book was ready to be published, I was looking for cover blurbs and endorsements. And so I wrote her again, and I said, really, my book is an appreciative engagement with your arguments. Would you be willing to give me a cover endorsement? Within an hour, she responded to that. She said, I'd like to see it. So I sent her a PDF of the manuscript. And within 24 hours, that's remarkably fast reading. I'm sure she has a little other reading to do with her work. Within 24 hours, she wrote back and let me know that I stated her argument accurately, and that as a matter of personal policy, she doesn't provide cover endorsements. So that's my total interaction with Professor Callard. Read about her personal life too, if you want to look her up. She is an interesting person. Hungarian. She was born in Hungary, and at age 5, parents emigrated first to Europe, well, Western Europe, and then. So I'm going to give you a couple of her statements from this essay. And if these don't provoke you, then you're not paying attention. What's the most uninformative statement that people are likely to make about themselves? My nominee, Agnes Callard, said, I love to travel. In her mind, that reveals nothing about you, except, as we'll see, that you probably have an above average income. Tourism is what other people do. Tourism is what we call traveling when other people are doing it. Are you aware that almost all uses of the word tourist have a negative connotation? So we talk about cities that are over touristed, or we talk about tourist traps that we don't want to go to. Tourism is largely a negative word, and so we apply it to other people. I'm a traveler, but I would never refer to myself as a tourist. Did I mention this last time? I don't want to bore you again. Okay, so Agnes Callard says travel is equivalent to locomotion. All it is. That's all it amounts to, is locomotion. So here's her example. I went to France. Okay, but what did you do there? I went to the Louvre. Okay, but what did you do there? I went to see the Mona Lisa. That is, before quickly moving on, apparently many people spend just 15 seconds looking at the Mona Lisa. And if you've gone to I've been to them too. If you've gone to one of those major museums in Europe, it's true. People spend on average about 15 seconds in front of the most famous paintings or sculptures in the world. And there's pressure to keep to keep moving because other tour groups are coming in, and I think this is a revealing issue that she raises. I have another little story that goes along. Maybe I'll come back to it. Travel's fun. She will agree that travel is a fun thing to do, but why is it that we feel a need to imbue it with a vast significance and an aura of virtue? Anybody feel challenged with this one? When we go somewhere, we feel a need to tell people what a rich experience it was for us. Okay. Agnes Callard is her area of concentration in philosophy is ancient philosophy. In fact, her most recent book is about Socrates. He said that philosophy is a preparation for death for everyone else that's traveled. Do you like her yet? Have I made her seem like a person you'd enjoy a dinner with? There she is. Look, after reading this essay, I came away thinking, you know, she's onto something and we should pay attention to what she says, which is the gift. It's a painful gift, but it is the gift of the contrarian to raise questions about what we take for granted. All right. In addition to everything else, she cites all kinds of writers in history who have raised questions about travel. G.K. Chesterton, English writer and philosopher, his claim was that travel actually narrows the mind. I'll bet you haven't heard that said very often. Certainly not the people who print the brochures that, you know, entice you to go somewhere. Ralph Waldo Emerson claimed that travel was a fool's paradise. He and his buddy Henry David Thoreau didn't like to go anywhere. I mean, the truth of the matter is they stayed put. Emerson had a lovely estate. He allowed Thoreau to build a little hut on it where Thoreau lived for a while, but those two were perfectly content not going anywhere. Socrates and Immanuel Kant, I think they're two of the most formidable philosophers in history. They never went anywhere. Athens and Königsberg, it was enough of a world for them, and their minds did the traveling. Samuel Johnson, I think he too is onto something, because this is a comment I often hear from people who go away and come back. What I gained by being in France was learning to be better satisfied with my own country. So isn't this a frequent comment that people make? Oh, I just so grateful to be an American. I was 17 or 18 years old, and the Iron Curtain was still in place. And I remember traveling with my parents into East Berlin through Checkpoint Charlie. And there was a group of American tourists nearby, and I could hear them saying things while they're being checked by East German guards. I could hear them saying, "Oh, we're so glad to be Americans." And then their tour group leader was saying, you know, silence at this moment is golden. But for some people, going abroad is just confirmation that we live in a pretty great place here. Just so you know, Callard is not the first person to be a contrarian. Back in 1911, the Atlantic Monthly published an anonymous essay. This might have been by the editorial board of the Atlantic Monthly. So travel, according to the author of this essay, is the great epidemic of the modern world, wasteful of time and money, disastrous to the places visited, most unbeautiful in all its effects. That's the Atlantic Monthly. And over 100 years before Agnes Callard. So think about this. If travel more than 100 years ago was the great epidemic of the modern world, think about today. 10 million people traveled internationally at that time. Today, the number is up to 1.4 billion. Am I annoying you yet? I'm doing my best. So last time, what I tried to do was to show you how big the subject of travel really is. And it includes voluntary and involuntary travel. When academics study travel, they have a far bigger thing in mind than a Viking river cruise, or I don't know, whatever kind of vacation you might think of. Just so you know, after reading about that, the focus of my book is about voluntary forms of travel, right? Not only to holiday destinations, but this is what I've done a great deal of in my life: mission trips to places around the world, pilgrimages, study tours, and so on. I still think that most of us, and this is why we can still be friends. I think that most of us, when we set out and go someplace, really do believe and hope that we have an enriching, transforming experience at these. That, oh, and there's that word broaden. I don't know exactly what that means, but that it's going to broaden us. I said some negative things about Mark Twain yesterday, and I'm going to say a few more today, and then I'll take some of it back. So Mark Twain and other travel writers of his generation were very critical of other cultures. They took a colonial perspective on other cultures. They were patronizing. And I think that Mark Twain is the chief sinner among them. Innocents Abroad, which I read in preparation for writing this book, is just embarrassing and cringeworthy on every page. So what people remember from Innocents Abroad is this quote: travel, I'm just going to read it for you. Travel's fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime. Oh my goodness, I want that to be true. The problem is it wasn't for Mark Twain. Right? He got himself on this, somebody paid his way because he promised to write about his experience. So somebody got him on a steamship. He sailed to Europe. His first stop was the Azores Islands off the coast of Portugal. But the ultimate destination was the Holy Land, which it was called even then. So Twain visits countries along the way and disparages them. It's just shocking the way he writes about these other countries. So can I read this one for you? I mean, this is at the beginning of the book, and it only gets worse. The community is eminently Portuguese, that is to say, slow, poor, shiftless, sleepy, and lazy. There is not a wheelbarrow in the land. They carry everything on their heads or on donkeys or in a wicker-bodied cart. That's awful. Whose wheels are solid blocks of wood and whose axles turn with the wheel. I guess he's not approving. There is not a modern plow in the islands or a threshing machine. All attempts to introduce them have failed. The good Catholic Portuguese crosses himself and prays to God to shield him from all blasphemous desire to know more than his father did before him. Well, that's clever writing. And it is in keeping with his satirical style, right? But I mean, if you're brave of heart, I encourage you to read this for yourself and then find out that I'm wrong. I presented this class one time at a church in the area. I guess I won't identify it. And a professor of English at the college approached me afterward and said, but this is his unique brand of humor. And I thought, yes, I get that, but it's still problematic. Okay, now I'm going to take some of it back. Ron Chernow has a wonderful new biography of Mark Twain. Have any of you had a chance to see it? Be forewarned, it's 1,100 pages. And most of it is about what a bad businessman Mark Twain was, which will become important in a second. But it's a wonderful biography, and it gives a far more nuanced view of Twain's view of other cultures. Okay, so I learned something after writing the book. I learned something about Mark Twain that I really needed to know. By the way, Mark Chernow is the author of Hamilton, the one that influenced the writing of the musical and a couple of other very good and well-known biographies. So Twain was a miserable businessman. He made just some terrible decisions along the way and was always, not always, but several times on the verge of bankruptcy. And one of his strategies to escape bankruptcy was to decamp with wife and one or two daughters to Europe. Imagine doing that to escape money problems here. Let's go live in Europe for a while. Times have changed a little bit, but he would go to Europe and he lived in places like Germany. I think he lived in northern Italy at one time and also England. Those were the countries that he visited most of the time. And when he went there, he was honored, which he loved. People would have him come and give speeches and so on. And so he really loved this travel. He became fluent in German along the way and has a wonderful essay about the German language, which I recommend to you if you've ever tried to study German. It's really funny. And it appears that he did come to appreciate the people and the cultures in those countries I met. But it took, I mean, by the end of his life, he had come to a deeper appreciation of who these people were. All right, does that seem more fair than my original presentation? Okay. Are any of you fans of Mark Twain? Or has it been a long time since you've, okay. Unsolicited endorsement here. There's a new book. Is it James Percival? Is that how you say his name? It's called James. So it's the story of Huckleberry Finn. No, it's a story of the slave James. Yeah. Thank you. Told from Jim's perspective. It's a wonderful book, and I think it's a nice response to Twain's own writing. I'm not going to spend much time on pilgrimage. I think you already know that I'm a big fan of pilgrimage, but I want to ask the question, what about pilgrimage? Well, is that any good? Can we say good things about that? I've done it with groups of people, including a group that with Pat Locke. I've done it by myself. I think that pilgrimage is one of those kinds of travel that could be life-changing and transformative. And I'm going to come back, give you an example about that at the end. See, on the other hand, pilgrimage is for, this is my experience in leading groups. It's for the newly retired with lots of disposable income. And lots of time to take trips. So whenever I took a group of church people to Israel, I can tell you what the age group was. It was late 60s, early 70s, still energetic, and then their 30-something pastor reading Bible stories to them at various stops along the way. But even the solo travel I've done, just getting to Portugal, just getting to Spain to walk one of these Camino paths, it requires a plane ticket and time, and not very many people can do that. Remember my comments about Burning Man last time? I don't have much regard for this. The participants are called burners. Well, studies show 80% of them are quite affluent, and they have time to go. I think is it late summer, or when is Burning Man held? I think it's late summer. I mean, based on the way they're dressed, I guess it must be warm there. These are rich people playing in the desert, and if you found Burning Man to be a meaningful experience in your life, I'm sorry, but it well, it was true. I gave this presentation elsewhere and somebody came up to me later and said that. I did it and loved it. Okay, so still, burners and people like me who walk the Camino trails are among the world's privileged people. I told you about the Kumbh Mela last time. 400 million people gather along the Ganges River every 12 years. This is not an annual event, but every 12 years. I mean, imagine 400 million people descending on one place. It causes unimaginable, I was going to say destruction, but damage to wherever they go. And then this last January, as you heard me say last week, dozens of people were killed or injured because of I can never remember the term that's preferred over stampede, a crowd rush. The crowd rush, lots of deaths as a result. Lourdes, how many of you been? You're not Catholic. Oh, okay. So for Catholic people, I think a visit to Lourdes is quite important, quite meaningful. I think people go there for healings, but just at the surface level here, this is a community of 15,000 people. And for them, it's like tulip time every day of the year with people from all over the world descending on this community. And in fact, I don't think it's a stretch to say that Lourdes' entire economy depends on pilgrims coming from around the world, spending their money there. Without it being a pilgrimage destination, Lourdes would be a very different city today. It's at the base of the Pyrenees in southwest France. And it's really off the typical tourist path, I think, unless you're a Catholic and have a reason to go there. Cities like Venice, that's what's in the photo, Barcelona, Bruges, Amsterdam, they, especially at summer months, they are over touristed and it's awful. In cities like Bruges and Venice in particular, the native population has virtually disappeared. So I forget the percentages, but 25 to 30% of the people who live there are people who actually were born and raised there. The rest of their population has dispersed. Summer of 2024, the people in Barcelona took to the streets. They had had enough. And they said, tourists go home. Notice they didn't say seasoned travelers go home. They used the pejorative term. Tourists go home. But how many of you, Barcelona, that have, there's a gorgeous cathedral there. I mean, I understand were you going to say something about it? Oh, I understand the reason why people would love to go. It's just a gorgeous city, but there are too many of us. Venice has now taken steps to avoid the problem. They charge a tax, which doesn't deter affluent Americans from going. They ban large cruise ships. I can't believe they ever allowed cruise ships to enter the Grand Canal. I mean, what were they thinking? But anyway, they stopped that practice. They limit the size of tour groups. Oh, and I'm sure I've been in a group like this where the tour guide is using a small loudspeaker to communicate with the 40 or 50 people following her around. Well, those are now banned in Venice, at least. So I'm going to summarize the case against travel here, saying, please write this down because this is going to be on the test. The case against travel begins with the statement, travel does not transform us. I want to push back on that, as you know, but this is what Agnes Callard and others would say to us. It doesn't do what we claim it does. In fact, they speak about the boomerang effect, so that we return exactly like the people who left. When we return, we vote the same way we always did. We love our families as much or as little as we always did. Studies show that there is very little practical change in people who come back from these grand tours. But let me know if you want to push back against this. I sit there too. So wait a second.
Simple question, just, I might have missed it, but does Callard define travel the same way you did? Does she include pilgrimage and things like that in her definition of travel? Or doesn't she?
No,
Okay.
she does not get into those specifics, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to interview her. Because I was going to say, hey, what about this? What about the good kinds of travel that I've done that I didn't get a chance to ask?
I read Callard's essay, and I love her satire. She's very good at that. I didn't land with her on all of her conclusions, however, and I'm wondering what our our expectations are with regard to the transformative effect of travel. How would we define transformation as it relates to travel?
I've got some examples at the end. Real life people who've gone somewhere and have experienced life change. I'm not going to tell Pat's story. She can chime in with hers if she wants, but I include several of these stories in the book, and I wanted to present those to Agnes Callard too. I know people who have done this and have come back in a different way, but anyway, I didn't get the chance. I told you you would be irritated with me at some point. People who travel sometimes often present the worst versions of themselves to the rest of the world. Here's my story. I would be sitting in I lived and worked in Zurich for 5 years, and I'd be sitting in a restaurant at lunchtime with a church member, and a group of Americans would come in, and I would cry. I can pass most of the time until I open my mouth, but when I am in Northern Europe, I can look sort of like other Northern Europeans. But Americans would come into restaurants or other public places, and they'd be loud and obnoxious and demanding, and I would just want to crawl under the table. These are not my people. Anyway, Americans do not travel humbly. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say that in our family, we use the phrase "the ugly American." You might remember that book from long ago. We always say at the beginning of a trip, we are not going to be those people. And my daughter and I were in Paris a number of years ago, and a group of Americans was sitting nearby, and they were horrible. They were yelling, "I can't eat this," and take this isn't what I ordered. Take this back, and you could hear them all over the restaurant. So we were properly embarrassed on their behalf. So we ordered much more than we really wanted, and left a huge tip. So.
What country was that?
Paris.
I was going to say something about tipping too, which you don't need to do in Europe, although the waiters don't give it back to you. But it's really not an expectation. Yes, it's true. There is an ugly American caricature, but Americans typically don't try to fit in. I mean, with the way they dress, they seem to make no effort to adapt to local cultures.
Just a correction. The Ugly American came from the title of a book about a clergyman in Southeast Asia who was anything but the ugly American.
You remember the author? Yeah, it's taken on the term has taken on a different meaning. So I didn't know this either until I lived there, but if you want to round up a bill to the next $10, that's appreciated by any waiter. But there's no expectation, again, in Europe only, I don't know about other parts of the world, no expectation that you tip. That's a very American. Oh, there's I can't resist telling you this story. Have you ever heard of haircut tourism? I have made it a habit to get a haircut in another culture, another continent, just as a way of getting to know local culture. And I think women would not do this because there's more at stake with a woman's hair yet. But I think men can get away with it because if it's a bad haircut in 2 weeks, you would know. But anyway, one of the reasons I do that is to fit into the local culture. I think I'm going to get a local haircut and I'm going to try to blend as much as I can. And I'm going to get to know a stylist from a different part of the world. Do you know how much you bore people by telling them about your travel stories? I'm doing it now with you. My dad, on our family road trips every summer, would take hundreds of photos. And then he had them developed as slides and he would organize them into a carousel. You remember those? Well, this age group would remember that. I think that we as a family watched those trip photos one time and then they went into the closet. And I'm going to have to ask my younger sister. She's the one who cleaned out my parents' closets, but I don't know what happened to those thousands of slides that my dad took. Nobody else wanted to see them.
I will say that in that vein, being the child of missionary kids or of a missionary family and having to hear the same show for I don't know how many times when parents went to supporting churches, that gets to be painful. So
I don't even know what to say. Okay, so maybe you are already aware of that. It's enough to say I love to travel and then let other people draw their conclusions about how much you've done in 90 some countries. So here's an interesting issue. Are you familiar with terror management theory? It sounds awful, doesn't it? But a number of years ago, a number of decades ago, psychologists developed something called the terror management theory. And their conclusion was that one of the most powerful motivations for people to travel, especially Americans, is to deal with the fact that they're not going to live forever. So a lot of the planning we put into travel, a lot of the travel itself is about the fact that we're all going to die at some point in our lives. I'm trying to think of an example that I could. So as it turns out, big travel companies have an interest in terror management theory because they design their brochures and their trips to address exactly what this fear is about. So the trips that you're reading about online, those companies know exactly how to get inside your imagination. I think that's all I'm going to say about that, but I do want to say something about bucket lists too. You're not going to dare raise your hand when I ask questions, but how many of you have a bucket list? A mental one or written? Okay. I don't. The term bucket list is relatively recent. The term made it into the Oxford English Dictionary only about 10 years ago. I think it first entered the public lexicon at the time of the movie with, is it Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman? That was a popular success. That movie made close to $200 million, but Roger Ebert said it was an orgy of male bonding. So the critics panned it, people loved it. But when you think about what those two men did, I mean, it's fun. It's a fun movie to watch. Those men went all over the world. What they did would be remarkable for younger, healthier men. But these were two men who were dying of cancer, and yet somehow they found the energy to travel all over. I mean, it's an unbelievable story. Barack Obama helped to put the term into public consciousness he was, during his presidency, he was at a meeting of European leaders in the UK, and he was within a half hour of Stonehenge. So he said, let's stop by. And Barack Obama stopped by for 15 minutes. Think about this. This is kind of like the Mona Lisa. He stops by, he got a little tour, and from the photos I've seen, he looked like he was enjoying himself very much, which I would have too. And then he had a little time with the reporters before jumping back in his car, and he said, well, I can take that one off the bucket list. And at the time, as I said, that was a relatively new term in public discourse. All right, now I'm going to tell you the negative stuff about this. Do you know the name Kate Bowler? Kate Bowler teaches history, church history at Duke University. And at a certain point, I forget how many years ago now, she was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And during her treatments, people were sent in to talk to her to get her to write a bucket list, basically. They were encouraging her to think about things that she would like to do before she died. And she said all of these death counselors seemed to be named Caitlin. And they had all kinds of suggestions for her on things she could do before she died. And I'm not able to think of any of them. And it wasn't about travel, but it was about a bucket list. Think of things you'd really like to do that would give your life meaning before you're not with us anymore. Kate Bowler wrote an essay for the New York Times, an op-ed piece, and the title was "Why I Will Never Write a Bucket List." She is an enemy of the whole idea of the bucket list. But she has dreams. There are places she'd like to visit. There are things she'd like to do. She has one of the most engaging minds in the academic world today. And yet, thinking of life as a series of items that we check off is not what she wants to do. So you may feel put down if you said, yes, I have a bucket list. I think what her complaint is that we can't think of life as a series of items to check off. That is not finding meaning and transformation. Oh, she's written 2 memoirs about her. Yeah, go ahead. She's written 2 memoirs about her illness, and they're both worth your reading. I think I'll leave it at that.
You haven't touched on medical tourism yet, which is becoming increasingly popular for a couple of reasons.
I think last week I mentioned a seminary classmate who in retirement went to Costa Rica and had all of her teeth replaced because she was never happy with them and thought, I have time to do it now. And yes, but people go for plastic surgery and maybe other procedures that they think are less expensive. That's a horrifying story. I'm not sure I want you to repeat that either, even for the people on Zoom. It is a horrifying story. All right, I think I'm not going to say any more about the bucket list. We had a conversation before class started today. I said, I want to go to India someday. I think, so is that a bucket list? Yeah, I guess it is at some level. But I try not to live my life checking off items on the list. This is Callard again. Really, there are 3 options, she says, for human beings: stay home, travel for work, or admit to yourself that that travel is a useless exercise in vanity. I'm letting that soak in. Okay. So where does that leave us? I still want to push back, and I still want to say, under the right circumstances, with some planning, some interior work, that travel can be a transforming event. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. So I grew up in the church. I have to say, I never learned wonder and awe as a child going to church. Sorry. I don't know if my parents had that as a goal for bringing me to church every week. The place where I remember feeling awe the first time was at the Grand Canyon on one of these family road trips that I took. The vastness of this, whatever this is, the vastness of this canyon is overwhelming, and it was to a young boy. 277 river miles long. I learned a new concept then about how to measure distances. 18 miles wide at its widest point. I had never seen anything quite like it, and it took my breath away. And I thought, okay, well, not immediately, but I realized later that's what wonder feels like. Awe. And so you don't have to go to Europe to experience wonder and all. You can go to the national parks in the US. Exactly. And burn gas getting there. Yep. So because I lived in Europe for a few years, I had to find a cheap airline to make the trips more often than I really wanted to. And so Iceland Air turned out to be the cheapest way to get back and forth. But the problem with Iceland Air is that you have to stop in Iceland on your way. There's always a stop midway. And then they always put on pressure to stay. And so my wife and I thought, okay, the last time we fly back home, we're going to stay for a while in Iceland and see all the wonderful places that they recommended to us. I know that the Northern Lights are visible in Northern Michigan. You have never seen Northern Lights until you have gone to Iceland. The ancients wrote, well, they wrote poetry about it, but they thought this was a signal from the gods. And then when I was there, I thought the same thing. It is overwhelming to see the sky light up in this way. Any Iceland travelers here? You don't take Iceland Air? Yeah. It's the only thing we did there was drive in a rental car, drive the perimeter of the island. But my takeaway, the thing that I remember today, is the evenings, the evening sky. I followed a couple of college students up this mountain. I was 50 years old, and I thought I can keep up with them. And I didn't realize until after I saw the photo that I sweat through 2 shirts climbing to the top of Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu was built in the 15th century by the Incas. It's like Stonehenge in a way, in that it aligns with astronomical bodies. It has a very sophisticated layout, but no one knows why it was built, and no one knows why it was abandoned shortly thereafter. It's just this amazing ruin at the top of a mountain. And again, I sweat through 2 shirts, but I had the same thrilling, awe-inspiring feeling reaching the top of that mountain. So I don't think she would be persuaded by that argument that awe and wonder is a reason to travel. So I'm going to set that aside for now. I think her response, I think I know what her response would be. Human beings feel a need to imbue, her favorite word, imbue our experiences with something more than they really have. So I'm going to offer something else to you. Maybe a better measure of the value of travel is to ask ourselves, am I different? Am I different as a result of where I was and the people I encountered? Right? Has there been a noticeable change in my behavior? In other words, is there anything at all about me that is different as a result of this once in a lifetime travel experience? And I think the answer is some of the time. Can I go on record here saying I'm a fan of Rick Steves? I think everything I read about his view of travel, I agree with immediately. I think he's wonderful, and he's a good Lutheran boy. Dating a Lutheran bishop, I understand. Anyway, he had an interview not long ago, which was published in the Christian Century, and I'm going to I'm going to read this for you because I think it's wonderful. People have a lot of fear. The flip side of fear is understanding. When you travel to places new to you, you understand more, so you fear less. And then you can love people as a Christian should. Those of us who travel are a little more resilient when it comes to weathering the propaganda storms that blow constantly across the US media. What do you think about that? One more reason to like. I think he has a relatively recent book. I think he has dozens of books, but he has a relatively recent one called Travel as a Subversive Act. Is that the name of it? Or Travel as a Political Act? Okay, I think that's what he's getting at here. Not subversive, it is a political. But in order to understand at a deeper level, you have to get off the bus, you have to interact with the culture. Pico Iyer, is that a familiar name to you? He's of Indian origin, but he was born in the UK. He has lived in the United States. I think he currently lives in Japan, where he's married to a Japanese woman and has children with her. He says pretty much the same thing. It seems to me that a lot of the problems we have today, racism, xenophobia, toxic nationalism, are because so many people have never been exposed to different peoples, cultures, and communities beyond their immediate world. Basically, they've never traveled. Do you think travel can be an antidote to the pervasive fear and hostility toward the other we see around the world? I do. I do. Oh, I'm going to say something else about Pico. We'll come back to him. So here's my story. I guess I'll present myself as Exhibit A. On my first visit to Israel, one of the people on the trip had been to Israel a few times before, and he said, we've got to go to this little village in Galilee called Ibelin. Okay, and we can meet some Arab Christians there, Palestinian Christians. Okay, and at the time that meant nothing to me, although everybody on the group, there were 35 of us, I think, 33 of us, we all read Elias Shakur's book, Blood Brothers, before we went. So we knew a little bit about his story. And we had a Palestinian Christian driver and guide. And when I mentioned to them that I wanted to go meet this Palestinian Christian man, they were thrilled. They were more than eager to deviate from the printed itinerary so that we could take this day trip to Ibelin. This turned out to be meeting Father Shakur at the school, which he built in Ibelin, turned out to be a life-changing experience for me and another person I'll mention in that. Elias Shakur was a child in 1948, whenever the state of Israel came into existence and Jews from all over the world poured into the region, and his father and older brothers were taken away into a camp. And the last thing his father said to Elias, little boy, was no violence. So Elias Shakur is a pacifist, but I have never met a stronger man. I'm going to cry as I tell this story, even though I've told it a dozen times before. He stands on nothing more than what he thinks of as God's truth, and he is immovable. He is one of the strongest individuals I have ever met, and he taught me about what it means to be a pastor. So on every succeeding trip, there were 6 more after that first one. The first stop we make after an overnight and catching up on our sleep is to go to Ibelin and see Father Shakur. At one point, he was Archbishop of Galilee, and then we went to Haifa and met him at the Archbishop's residence in Haifa. But all the other trips were to the school that he founded. So, a remarkable experience for me, but I want to give you another example of how lives can be changed. One of the people on this trip was Susan Drynan, who I got to see last weekend. Susan Drynan was a high-level executive. She wasn't the CEO, but she was a high-level executive at GE, and a long career there. She was on her trip with her husband, Greg, and again, I didn't know what was going on in her mind as we sat there at that school that day. but she listened to Elias Shakur speak, and she experienced an aha moment. And within months of getting back to the US, she had resigned her position at GE and went to work full-time for the Mar Elias Educational Institutions, raising money. She has led more than 24 other pilgrimages back to Israel. She became a she became a high-level officer in his organization. Oh, and they started the first Arab Christian university in northern Israel. So one more word about Father Shakur. His vision, in a nutshell, is learning peace on the desktops of children. Right? He wants to bring Jews and Christians and Muslims and Druze into classrooms together so that they can learn to get along with each other, and they can learn their geography or math or whatever they need to learn side by side. That's his vision. And tell me that that's not compelling after everything that's happened in the last couple of years. He's getting old. I don't know who's going to take over for him, but I think he's a remarkable man. Questions about him? I got through that without crying. So Pico Iyer. Again, I'm just going to read this for you. The physical aspect of travel is for me the least interesting. What really draws me is the prospect of stepping out of the daylight of everything I know into the shadows of what I don't know and may never know. Confronted by the foreign, we grow newly attentive to the details of the world, even as we make out sometimes the larger outline that lies behind. What's one of the first things to do if you'd like a transforming experience? Take yourself out of your comfort zone. Get scared. See people who see the world from a completely different perspective. Not Republicans, not Democrats. People who have a whole different history from ours. I'm not a huge Tolkien fan, but I love this quote. Are any Tolkien fans here? It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out your door. You step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off. I think that's my favorite line from the trilogy. Okay, if you want to know Doug's view of, you'll never travel with me after reading this. But if you want to know Doug's view of travel, this is it. Personally, I like going places where I don't speak the language, don't know anybody, don't know my way around, and don't have any delusions that I'm in control. Disoriented, even frightened, I feel alive. Awake in ways I never am at home. All of my senses suddenly become alert again, and I can see, hear, and smell. Okay, there are travelers here because I can see that stirred something. Okay, I just think this is a wonderful quote. I mentioned Annie Dillard last time. She's the one who gives me hope about people who don't have means. She never traveled more than 2 miles from her home. She went to the creek, not to fish or swim or even to look at it, but to find out what it said. And as it turned out, it said a lot. So it's why I count on my almost daily walks on the beach. I'm there to find out what it's going to say. So N.T. Wright, some of you must know him, Anglican theologian, New Testament scholar. He wrote a book back in the 90s, published by Erdman's in Grand Rapids. And I wish I had read it before my first visit because it's really good about how to lead a pilgrimage tour to Israel. But I'm going to give you an account of what happened to him on his visit. The most gripping part of Wright's account is his description of visiting the place where Jesus died, or Golgotha, the Aramaic word for the place of the skull. As Wright tells the story, he spent a considerable amount of time there thinking and praying, and alone with his thoughts, he reports that in a way I still find difficult to describe, all the pain of the world seemed to be gathered in that one place. First, he thinks of the pain and anger of the Palestinian people he has been meeting and talking to. Then he remembers the paranoia and painful memories of the Israelis, whom he has also been meeting and talking to on this trip. And finally, he thinks of the Armenian Christians living in Jerusalem to this day, who carry their own memories of genocide, an event in history made even worse by a certain silence that has often surrounded it, in deference, as some see it, to the modern state of Israel. In all, Wright reports spending 2 to 3 hours in that place before leaving it behind and moving on. And when he does, he writes, and this is what I'm trying to lead up to, I emerged eventually into the bright sunlight, feeling as though I had been rinsed out spiritually and emotionally. And it was then he recognizes that I had become a pilgrim. As I said, I wish I had read that before I led my first group to Israel. He gets it in a way that so many other people do not. I feel as though I should add this. You have these 2 or 3 hours of enlightened consciousness sitting at what may or may not be the place of the skull, since nobody knows where those holy sites are, and there's no scholarly consensus about what happened anywhere. Anyway, he spent 2 or 3 hours, had this amazing experience. But think about this. He was there for 10 or 12 days, travel, conversation, shared meals, spending a lot of time with members of his church. He went with his church group, listening to lectures, lots of mundane activity. So what does he take away from his 10 to 12 day experience? 2 to 3 hours sitting in one spot, having time to reflect on what happened there. I think that's remarkable. And it's, let me say this. Okay, here's a positive way of saying it. I think that all the travel hassle that we experience, the waits and security lines and getting our luggage at baggage claim, and in those moments, the kind that N.T. Wright describes, in those moments, all of those travel hassles fade away. And what we take away, what we remember, and the story we tell is what he recounts here. Have I convinced anybody? All right. We have time to chat a little bit. I brought something that Ron Chernow wrote, and I went by it when we were talking about Mark Twain. I could come back to that if you'd like to hear the exact words he uses. But next week, we're going to be looking at 12 strategies for making travel more than it often is. And I think you're not going to like every one of those. But these are strategies that I have found that leave me in the Michael Mershaw camp. How do you get out of your life here? How do you get out of it far enough to really experience something different, something that we're not used to? If you have comments or questions to make, let's talk about them now, and then I'm going to come back to what Chernow says about them.
One of the things about taking a vacation is that you rest and you get away from everything. I think psychologists say that if you take like a day of vacation, maybe you take a Friday off, you're really not taking time off for yourself to get away from your normal rhythms of life. You need at least 4 days before you rejuvenate. To me, traveling is a way to rejuvenate also, just in itself, just to get away from what you're doing.
Right.
But any comments about that?
I think last time, I forget, but I think I made a distinction last time between travel and vacation. My joke was, after you hear my presentation, none of you will go on a vacation with me. I would never vacation with that guy. But I tried to reassure you and say, I get why we need to do that. And I've done my share. Go to Cancun for a long weekend in the middle of a Michigan winter. I get that. I've done it. But what I'm focusing on is a different kind of travel. Maybe it's a luxury to get away from everything. But both kinds of travel are important.
I, I wanted to know if Callard addressed conversation in terms of being in another country and the language. If she
No.
doesn't.
No, as far as I know, she's she's never gone anywhere, but I don't know if that's really true. She was born in Hungary and came to the United States as a small child. Beyond that, I know nothing about her travel habits. She does say at one point, let's just go on a vacation and enjoy ourselves and not call it more than it is. So maybe she does go place. I don't know.
Steve,
Just
go
real,
ahead.
just real quick, Doug. You mentioned leading mission trips.
Yes.
Have you found any benefits to those?
There's a chapter in the book on that. I think mission trips are deeply problematic, and people have written about those problems with mission trips. I feel pretty good about the ones I have taken, but even they have some serious difficulties. So, okay, I started doing this with a high school group from the Wheaton Church, which Pat mentioned. I would love to introduce those high school students today and ask if any of them are engaged in activities helping out their neighbors, paint their houses and build wheelchair ramps and so on. I don't know if those trips had any effect on those kids whatsoever. And I'm sad about that. But my own daughters though, boy, I think your kids went too. My own daughters push back when I say that to them, and they say, no, Dad, that was a high point of the year for us.
My son Ben also found it to be an experience like that.
So those are the domestic ones. We as soon as school let out, we would pile on a bus, adult leaders in the front, the kids in the back listening to music, and we would go to a disadvantaged community. And yeah, okay, you know how that goes. The high points there were when we got to know our homeowners, right? And I always thought the kids were goofing off. I was their boss during that week, trying to keep them on task. But then they would end up talking to the old man and old woman who lived there. And in hindsight, I think, yeah, that was really the right thing to do, because they developed a relationship while I'm standing there painting the side of the house. Okay, and so that's domestic. And then at a later church I served, we did a fair amount of international traveling for mission trips. The church I served in Ann Arbor went with Jimmy Carter build to the Philippines, Dumaguete City, southwest of Manila. The goal was to build, I don't know, 150 houses, and they didn't quite make it, but the church I served committed to going back every year until they completed 150 houses on what came to be known as Jimmy Carter Street. I felt pretty good about those trips, partly because we always included Filipino people in our work crews. It wasn't just white people going to do good things. We were working side by side with people who lived in the neighborhood. Example number two, the church I served in Ann Arbor built a nursing school in Haiti, in Leogan, which happened to be the epicenter of an earthquake that happened there, not the worst earthquake imaginable. Anyway, because Ann Arbor had so many people from the medical school, nursing school, and so on, they could visit on occasion and do medical trips into the mountains. But the nursing school is run by a woman from Haiti. It's the only 4-year nursing school in the country. I thought our work there was commendable. But we're white people doing nice things for dark-skinned people. What was the other one? Oh, Peru. That's how I wound up on the top of Machu Picchu. The Shining Path either drove out the young men in these rural communities, or they killed them. And so what was left after the Shining Path did their thing were women and children. So the Presbyterian Church in Peru began to build community centers and they taught skills to the women who were left. And And so we came alongside the Presbyterian Church in Peru in developing these community centers in rural areas. I feel pretty good about that. But I like you, I've read all the. Yeah, I mean, you want to say any more? I've read the analysis of mission trips. I have to agree with much of it. Excuse me.
I think sometimes we don't realize how things have changed us, or certainly our opinions and how we feel about particular aspects of our lives until we're home again for a while. And I remember I traveled primarily in Europe, and much of it was before the fall of the wall. And I was in Prague to work with and to see how a particular internationally known animator worked doing short films. And we were there for a week and a half when we went home, and we were guests of the government. So while we were there, it was the 30th anniversary of the walk-in, the first time that Czechoslovakia attempted to revolt, and the Russian army walked into the city with their tanks. They got us out of the city. They took us to a spa for the day, but we got back too early. And so the tanks were still there. They were just leaving. We could see the people standing up against the walls of the various buildings with tears rolling down their faces. So when we got out, as we crossed into Vienna, at the end of our trip, you could feel the whole bus just this tremendous sigh of relief as we came across the border. But when I got home, Kennedy Airport was still the primary northeastern port of return, not New Jersey. Newark hadn't been built yet. And a lot of the baggage handlers were on strike. And they were yelling and screaming and parading about with their signs. And I remember running up to one of them and I said, "Can I hug you?" I had just spent this much time with people who had no voice in their own government. I came home and started working in politics.
I like that story. Thank you.
I spearheaded a mission trip where we raised money to bring water to a Thai village. The missionary that was located there and still is runs a coffee consortium, and he works with hill tribes to grow coffee. But of course, to grow coffee, you have to have water. And so we thought we were doing this great thing, going and helping them build the water tank and put the piping in to come down the mountain. And it was really a growing experience. The people really appreciated it. And we did, of course, the Bible studies and all those sorts of things. But it was really interesting because here are these Americans, city dwellers, who are coming to help you build this. And we would need something. And these people, one day we needed a fence. And so they got out their machetes, and in an hour they had built a bamboo fence, you know. So we learned a lot from them too. I mean, we helped them, but they taught us a great deal about resilience and what was needed. And before we went, we had long discussions about, well, should we just send the money? Oh, no, we're going to go to help them. But in reality, they helped us more than we helped them. If we had just sent the money, they'd have been just as well off.
Can I ask you something? Your story makes me want to ask this question. Were you prepared ahead of time for any of those experiences? Did they tell you what, did you have any preparation at all, orientation?
You mean for mixing cement with, with a pipe
Well-
as a shovel?
You have a higher skill level than I do.
Well, I had been on an exploratory trip where I had met the missionary and we had stayed in the refugee camps between Burma and Thailand. So I had a feel for what the conditions were going to be because we also lived in their homes with them, which I tried to share with people. But other than that, I don't know that we were really prepared.
What, something about your story made me think of this. Looking back on both the high school mission trips and the other ones I've done, I think if we had prepared the students more, they could have had a richer experience. We could have said, this is going to be about you. Yes, we're going to build a wheelchair ramp. But here are some questions that you need to be thinking about as we go through this week. And I regret that we seldom did that. I regret that we did that so seldom. I was hoping you would.
Well, I will add one thing to it that I don't think Doug knows, and that is that the church was advertising this and promoting this trip to Greece and Turkey to follow in the footsteps of Paul. And I thought, well, that sounded really interesting. I was going through a very difficult time in my life, and the children were still fairly young. And one day I just wrote the check and brought it into the church and as the down payment for the trip. And I really think that was God's will, God's doing.
You're not going to tell the rest of it? Okay.
He didn't tell me. I've gone all over his books as a fellow writer, and he didn't tell me until after it was published what a sweet thing he wrote in his book about what happened to me.
So there's when pilgrims go to Israel, they stop at the Jordan River and they reaffirm their baptismal vows, and it can be a very moving thing for all of them. In fact, some of them come home with bottles of Jordan water, and then they want their own grandchildren to be baptized with Jordan water. I think, okay, I hope you boiled that. But we did something similar in Greece. We stopped at the home of Lydia, the seller of purple cloth. So
The river, it was outside ancient Philippi.
yeah. And I can't remember the name of the river in Philippi. Yeah, okay. I want to tell you everything I remember from what the guide said, and that's not important. But we stopped and we did a renewal of baptismal vows there because Lydia and her entire family were baptized in the same spot. Well, there were 43 people on the trip, and that was I was working pretty hard, saying meaningful things to people as I, sprinkled water on their foreheads. But after, and I have a photo of this with Pat, this moment. But after Pat experienced the reaffirmation of her baptismal vows, she went off and found a place to sit and began to think about what was going on in her own life and where God might be calling her. And I'm going to make a long story real short here. Pat came back to the U.S. and after some more discernment, enrolled in seminary and became a Presbyterian pastor. But you identified that moment as the turning point.
I think that was because I just had this experience of hearing in my mind God saying, "I love you just the way you are." And I don't think it was Mr. Rogers, but it was the first time I think anyone had ever expressed that to me.
I don't think it was me either. I don't think I said. So here's one more word about a pilgrimage. I think that I understand my role now as leading people to the event, and then it's out of my control. I say, here we are, and this is what happened here, and I read the story, And then what happens after that is out of my control. But you and Susan Drinan, whose story I told, you two are not the only two who have gone somewhere and decided, I need to do something different with my life. Okay, friends, I think I never was angry with professors who let us out 5 minutes early. So I think we're going to call it a day, and please come back next week for encouraging words. And I will not mention Agnes Callard's name ever again.